So we had Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil by John Byrne.
Yes.
Okay. We have some people missing today, so we'll just try to go with it.
The clicker's right behind you.
Okay, so Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil starts with John Byrne. He's actually like in the story. He's the narrator, and he moves from New York to Savannah. He was only going to stay there part-time, but he ended up falling in love with the place. And he met a bunch of crazy people like Jim Williams, who was one of the other main characters in the story, who's like an antiques dealer. He met Luther Driggers, which is like this crazy like chemist guy. He met Chablis, which was like a black drag queen. And it was just all these crazy people that he met and ended up becoming friends with. And you just get to hear about his experiences in Savannah, Georgia. And what ends up happening is that Jim Williams gets convicted of murder of Danny Hansford. And the rest, like half of the book, is about this story, the case of Jim Williams, and trying to, like, did he actually do it or did he not do it? What exactly happened? Like, what was the motive? And there's also this crazy Minerva. She's like a voodoo priestess lady, and he like tries to take her on to try and like hypnotize people to like get them in his favor for the case, so he's found not guilty. And the story just kind of ends with him not being convicted, and he gets to spend the rest of his time, Jim gets to spend the rest of his time in Savannah, Georgia, just how it used to be, and John stays in Savannah full-time to write the book, which is why he went there to begin with.
Oh, it's my first word. Genteel is my first word, and it just means very polite, very refined, and it kind of describes some of the people of Savannah. They're just very kind to one another, at least to their faces. And it's just basically describes Savannah as a whole.
Hypoglycemia is a type of deficiency of glucose in the bloodstream. This is what Jim Williams had, and that's supposedly why Danny was staying at his house, to make sure he didn't pass out due to this condition.
My next word was dilapidated, which basically means really run down, and it describes a lot of the houses in Savannah because they're very old, and a few of them were being reconstructed, redone at the time, but there were many very old buildings that were dilapidated in Savannah.
My word was amiably.
Amiably.
Having to showing pleasant, good-natured personal qualities. And that shows there was a lot of people who were very kind, they showed nice qualities, but like in reality behind closed doors they weren't, some of them, but a lot of them were.
Guile, it means sly or cunning intelligence, and this was used when describing one of the lawyers that was possibly Jim Williams, but then he had another client that he needed to defend.
And waif-like is a homeless person, especially a forsaken child or orphaned child. This was used to explain Danny Hansford when he was younger, because he kind of had a tough home life. And so we'll move on to the character summaries. Okay, so I had the narrator, or John Byrne. He, specifically in the book, there wasn't a lot of information given about him, just that he was a writer that was moved from New York to spend some time in Savannah to write a book. Like I said, he meets a lot of interesting people and makes a lot of friends. And the main event of the story is when Jim Williams, his murder of Danny Hansford, supposedly murders him. That's what he wrote about. The whole book is also told from his perspective, that, you know, there's no like third person in the book. It's always from his perspective. He also, in his writing, he really made sure not to be biased against anybody, that he was very open with what happened and was very realistic with what happened and didn't try to sugarcoat anything. And also something that I thought was interesting, Joe Odom, he's a character in the book, he actually says to him, "Oh, I want to be the hero in your book, that whatever you're writing about in Savannah, that people knew that he was writing this book, and so you kind of have to think, well, were people like playing themselves out to be more extreme than what they were? I don't think they were. I think they're literally just these crazy, weird people in Savannah. Oh, okay, and then, yeah, this was Lauren's, so I'll cover hers. She had the other main character of James, or Jim Williams. He was a rich antiques dealer and collector. He collected antiques from all over the world and sold them for money and collected them in his house. He lived in the Mercer house, which is like this famous house that a famous person by the last name of Mercer lived in. He kills Danny Hansford one night when they were having an altercation. He shot him and killed him. He was then charged with murder and sexual assault against Danny. And he receives, like I said, he receives help from the voodoo priestess Minerva to try and like hypnotize people and like bad juju on other people to try and get them in his favor. And he was the only person in the state of Georgia, like historically, to ever be tried 4 times for the same crime. That's historically accurate. And in the end, he was acquitted in the trial.
He was found guilty 3 times and then acquitted finally at the end.
Jeez.
So my character was Danny Hansford. He's my favorite character of the whole book. Literally the first time you see him, he runs in the room cussing, and you can see he has a pot leaf tattooed on one shoulder and the Confederate flag on the other. And immediately you're just like taken aback because this big beautiful mansion with like sophisticated gym, and then all of a sudden this just random rude person runs in. So he works for Jim Williams repairing antiques, but he takes care of him like with his hypoglycemia, just like makes sure that if he passes out, he's got somebody there. So we find out towards the end of the book that he is a bisexual male prostitute and Jim Williams' lover, which is partially why Jim gets charged with sexual assault against Danny, because they figured something went on there. Williams claims self-defense, but nobody really knows what happened there. And he basically gets away with everything that he does, no matter what. And we find out the reason for that later. I'll explore that later in the presentation.
I had Joe Odom. He was my favorite character. So he was mainly known as like a piano player, but he was actually like an ex-attorney. He really knows his way around rules. So like the first time we meet him, he is rerouting the power from one house to his house because they turned his power off because he didn't pay his bills. And like he talks about like how he had to like had a system on how to get the water back going through his house just so he didn't have to pay bills. He was a con man, but like literally no one could catch him, and nobody really wanted to because everyone loved him so much because he was just really smooth talker. He was very carefree, and yeah, he was a good person. I liked him.
At least an interesting person.
Yes.
Was he really the good person?
He wasn't a good person, but I liked him.
Okay, so Luther Driggers, he was a tall, lanky man with severe insomnia. He was very strange in Savannah. That's what he's seen as. He was an inventor, but he used to be a chemist for the federal government, and he claims to have a bottle of poison that could possibly kill the whole town. And he likes to walk his pet flies. And well, about the bottle of
You just
poison,
got their attention. They are now awake.
I thought that you misspelled files.
No.
And I was like, what does that mean?
his flies. I watched the movie, and it literally shows him walking flies with like a leash and everything. And
the leash on the fly.
He just like did he glue a string to them, or no? Did he
Or
tie
maybe
it?
tie it.
I don't remember if he glued
quite
it or
remember.
tied it, but
He
just tied a
doesn't
little
sleep. He has a lot of
string.
free time. It's fine.
yeah,
Right.
he doesn't sleep. And about his bottle of poison, in the movie, they were in a diner when he was first introduced in the movie, and after he leaves, the waitress was like, "You shouldn't drink the water tonight, just in case." like just in case.
Gosh.
Because he seemed a little upset when he left the diner.
Okay, yeah, this was Lauren's character, Chablis.
Chablis.
Yeah, in the
Chablis?
movie it's
Yes.
Chablis.
Pronounce Chablis.
Oh, I've been pronouncing it wrong.
It's French. Like the wine, Chablis.
I wouldn't know that.
Okay, so John meets her at a car dealership, and she's like, hey, I need a ride to like my job, so, I need a ride to my house, so you're gonna drive me because you're a white boy and I need you to drive me home. He's like, okay, I guess.
Why not?
She was an African American drag queen. She's transgender and she has to take these estrogen shots to like stay girly. And one of the reasons why like he becomes friends with her is that she needs a ride home after she gets the shots, because she said that she just gets all crazy after she gets them, so that it's not safe for her to drive. So she needs a chauffeur to bring her home. She's referred to as the Lady Chablis on stage. That's like her like personified version of herself that's very like proper Sarah.
Do you mean like her stage name? Is she like a
Yeah, that's like her stage name. She kind of, I mean, yeah, she does stuff like that, but she also does kind of like stand-up almost, where she just kind of starts like bad-talking people, but it's like humorous, so people are okay with it.
Like a podcast or something?
Yeah, they do kind of like, so like, if you ever watched like a drag show, like documentary, this is weird that I watched this, but it happened one time.
One time.
So like, there's some of them where they do like, they sing along to like mouth songs,
Oh,
or like they do
listening.
stand-up comedy or stuff like that. So like, this is kind of what this is. Like, she's not like a stripper or anything. She's like,
It's like a mix between stand-up comedy and a burlesque show.
yeah,
That's a
Yeah,
good
that's
way
a
to
good
explain it.
yeah.
And a burlesque
Yeah.
show is not necessarily a striptease.
Right.
Random.
Yes.
One time in English class, we learned.
You learn something new.
Okay, so the nightclub that she usually performs at is called Pickup. You actually find out that she quits the place because her boss sucks, and she's like, I'm outie. And then there's this big, like, show of her, like, everybody's, like, taking her dresses and, like, filing them through, like, the place, and it's, like, this big show, and she's marching down, like, the middle of the road. It was a big scene. I found it.
She's my favorite, one of my favorite characters
Yeah.
in this book.
Definitely. Yeah, she's extroverted, has very little filter. She does whatever she wants, and she does not care. Big questions, ideas, and points. Okay, this is mine. I had the acquittal outside of Savannah. So Jim Williams was acquitted outside of Savannah, and since Savannah is like this close-knit community, I don't think that they were going to let him off the hook, because they all knew who he was. They knew who he was, where he lived, they knew everything about him. But where he got acquitted, which was Augusta, which is outside of Savannah, they don't know who he is. And I think that that's why he was able to get acquitted, because if it would have been in Savannah, they would have just kept saying, no, like, you're guilty, because I know who you are, and I know that you're gay, which was another thing that people were kind of like, oh, that's weird, like, he's guilty. Because
Yeah.
it wasn't as accepted back in the 80s, which is when this takes place. And I don't know, I thought that was just a really interesting point from the book, that if you really think about it, that this whole book is about Savannah and how great it is, and then it's like, well, Jim is not going to be able to get acquitted unless it's with people that we don't know outside of Savannah and Augusta. So I thought that was pretty
So
interesting.
is it kind of showing that in some communities you know people too well?
Yeah, that you know everything about them, and so you're not going to let them off the hook.
And you know it whether it's true or not.
Right. Biased. This was Jalen's. Okay, so she was talking about in Savannah the whole story with all these crazy characters and this murder trial, and on these, like, everything that happens in Savannah, that she says that Savannah has its own way of dealing with things when it comes to, like, gossip, and how gossip just, like, spreads so quickly throughout Savannah. There was movie sets where it would take place in Monterey Square, which is just like this beautiful square in Savannah. And the murder of Danny Hansford, that's another thing that happened in Savannah, that if it didn't happen in Savannah, Georgia, that it wouldn't have the people in Savannah, Georgia wouldn't have been so accepting. I think that's what she's kind of going for, is that if it would have taken place anywhere else other than Savannah, Georgia, that the people wouldn't have been so okay with it. Because after the trial, everybody just went back to their normal lives, and it wasn't that big of a deal. Same thing with the movie sets. There was this big deal where they trashed the entire square to film like this old Western movie scene. And after everybody cleaned it up, it was just whatever, it was done. People were over it.
Would you say that's the same for like To Kill a Mockingbird? After that kind of trial?
I suppose. I don't really know like what you're getting at though.
Well, every town has its own flavor.
Yes.
Okay, that's how my friend Christy always said it. That they have their own idiosyncrasies and things, and Mockingbird, I think, was more representative of small towns in the South. That idea could have been applied to other places, kind of like you're reading a Friday Night Lights. Friday Night Lights is representative of other small towns in small town America. And this is kind of the opposite idea that they're saying.
Oh, this is my big idea. So, in the book, Savannah was described by somebody who has lived in and out of Savannah as a semi-tropical terrarium, and it kind of had its own vibe to it. It was kind of disconnected from the rest of Georgia, and that was kind of how they liked it. One of the characters in the beginning of the story said that a lot of people tried to, like a lot of big companies tried to test out new products in Savannah, and they were like, nah, like we don't want that. We've already got our own society. We like how it is, and we're not going to let your outside influence come to us. There were so many eccentric people, and it just had so much history. It was just full of all of that those historical vibes. So when the Williams case happened, it spread across the entire country, and it very briefly connected Savannah with the rest of the country because it was being talked about. And then after it was done, it just kind of went back to their separate kind of way of life. As soon as the trial was over, they all just kind of reverted, and they like it that way. They just kind of like to have their own little town that's divided. So I thought it was interesting how the case very briefly connected them with everybody else and then just reverted immediately.
Is this one mine?
Yeah.
Okay. It's been so long since we've done this. Okay, so why Danny? So why was he the one who was killed? So when Danny's alive, he seems to be like everywhere. Like if something happens, he's there. Like he seems to be in like every which way with the rich and the poor and the middle class and everywhere. So towards the end, we find out that Danny's a male prostitute, and we find out that he kind of goes everywhere. He's bisexual, and so is Jim and Danny's relationship really what Jim said it was? Is what we were. Okay, sorry, I'm everywhere right now. I'm gonna start.
Pause
over.
right there. They're all glaring at me because they didn't catch that right away, and I had to tell them, and then they're like,
Some of us
and I
caught
ruined the
that.
book for you.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
didn't catch it.
Some of us
because
caught
I'm
that.
oblivious.
Very good. I'm glad you caught
Me and
that.
Taryn got it, but
I'm
everybody else
oblivious.
seems to just
With the male
not
prostitute
get
part?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's
Nobody-
very subtle.
it
It didn't flat out tell you that he was a male
There
prostitute.
is nowhere in the book where it just flat out said he sleeps with everybody. That's why they love him. Like nobody. It never said that in the book.
What
You
was
had
the
to
name
infer.
of the one chapter? It was.
I don't remember.
But it was the chapter title was literally saying that Danny. Everybody has a little piece of Danny. It was something along the
Yeah,
lines
like
of that.
no. I think the quote was like Danny has the best stuff, but he gives it to everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that
it was
was it.
something like that. And that's why he got away with everything. Like he
Yeah.
could just like run over things or throw stuff at people's windows and nobody would care. They didn't want to get mad at him because if they got mad at Danny, Danny would be like, "Oh, I slept with you, you and you. You know, this person's gay, this person's not. Like this person sleeps with prostitutes." So nobody could get mad at him because then he would tell everybody their secrets.
You know that? Okay. You know the character in Hunger Games?
PETA, Gail,
No.
Just keep naming them.
The-
Primrose.
I don't remember their name.
Is it a guy or a girl?
The guy.
Frederick. Or not, no, Finnick O'Dare. Finnick O'Dare.
Finnick. He's like Finnick.
Yeah, but Finnick didn't have a choice. Finnick
Yes,
was good.
true.
Finnick's family would have been killed if he didn't do what
But-
he was told.
But the whole dealing in secrets bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
a good
Yes.
way of explaining it.
That's, yeah. That's what I was trying to get at. Next.
Another
Well done, Emma.
Another big thing we discussed a lot was how this book doesn't seem like it's nonfiction. There's so many crazy characters such as Luther Driggers, Chablis, Danny, and Jim Williams. That like it just makes it seem like it's nonfiction, and this couldn't have ever happened at all.
Like, it's just so much crazy all in one. It's like,
It
hold
sounds
up.
like a
It's
made
all-
up story. You have to like take yourself back, be like, wait, this actually happened?
Yeah.
These people are real?
Reads a lot like fiction.
Yeah.
This was Lauren's. So she pulled a Gatsby out of this. Old money versus new money, which, yeah, it's honestly a common theme in a lot of different books. I never realized it until we read Gatsby, but it's in. Okay, so people inherit their money and are admired than people who earn it.
Are more admired.
Oh, right, okay. So people who inherit their money, which is old money, are more admired than the people who earn their money, which is new money, and work their way up. So that's like the Jay Gatsby and the other guy in the book. Tom. There you go. Jim didn't inherit his money. He earned his money. He worked hard for it. He was selling antiques and buying antiques, and eventually he just got this like rich, crazy house, and he has all these really nice things. And Lee Adler, who is his neighbor, he inherited his money, and he's much higher up on the totem pole than Jim is, even though they're both really two respected people. Lee is in a bunch of these like organizations and these like clubs, kind of like yacht clubs or like golf club, like country club type things, where Jim is just like, I don't need to be part of that. Like, I know that I'm a good person and I don't need people to know that I have money because people just know that anyway. People who were born into wealth tend to look down on other people who were not. So Lee Adler kind of looks down on Jim because it's like, well, you had to work for your money, but I'm rich anyway, so I don't care. That's the way I can explain that.
Alright, so our critic responses, the one on the left says, Mr. Byrne's writing is elegant and wickedly funny, and his eye for telling details is superb. And that's our good review, I guess. And the other one is talking about. I haven't read these for a while. Yeah, I haven't read these for a while.
The book doesn't need deeper notes, working perfectly as rollicking popular anthropology with the ballast of Jim and Danny's tragedy. This is a book which leaves you amused, spooked, and introduced to a new piece of America.
So do you guys agree with these?
Yeah.
Missy
I
Kay?
think so. I kind of want to go to Savannah now. Yeah, so big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And tell us about this thing you're passing around.
This is our newspaper that we made.
It's our creative component.
It happened, I think, right after Danny was killed. No?
Yeah, it was dated as the day that Jim got acquitted.
Okay.
We should have here. Well, we will summarize some of the passages for you guys.
Please
Okay.
appreciate that Emily looked up the actual phone number for the cemetery to
Yeah.
publish in this newspaper.
Yes.
The real cemetery.
Okay, so I'll summarize the first one. The column is just about how Jim got acquitted, that it talks about what happened, and then it also asks the question, which the point that I made in the presentation, if the case would have stayed in Savannah, if he would have been acquitted, and then it asks some like fake local people what they think about it, and the general consensus is that there's a lot of opinions on the whole case itself.
Then there's an article on Luther Driggers and his poison. And then an advertisement for the Lady Chablis.
Very good. We're going to wrap it up there because we have another group to get in, but
Okay. That's sad, because
You didn't get to your cemetery.
no.
I think